I wanted to say hello to Mark Evans. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm great. Thanks for having me back again. I'm always excited to talk about brand positioning and the value it delivers to companies that are looking to grow their marketing and sales.
Yeah, before we get into brand positioning, I want to talk a little bit about you. You wrote the book Marketing Spark. Can you tell us a little bit about what is in that book?
So, Marketing Spark is, it's not, it's a book, but it's also a guide, and it's a kind of book that sits on your desk as opposed to a bookshelf. It really is a do-it-yourself guide for entrepreneurs to embrace the idea of story-driven marketing. And I think what makes it different from a lot of books is that there are worksheets, templates, lists of tools. So it's a very prescriptive book that talks about marketing from a concept point of view, but it actually helps you get marketing done. And I think that's the value of the book. That's the reason I designed it that way. And anybody's interested, they can. It's available on Amazon.
Yeah, I'll find it, put the link in the chat room in a couple of minutes. Now, I mentioned Marketing Spark specifically because I believe that's the name of your podcast as well.
I recently launched a podcast. It's 15-minute interviews with entrepreneurs and marketers in the trenches. And I selected 15 minutes because you listen to a lot of podcasts. It's great content, but a lot of people maybe want more of a snack than a meal. And so I've talked to some really great people. Today, for example, I published a podcast featuring Ron Tite from Church and State. I've had Deb Basu from Powered by Search. I've had some people talk about account-based marketing. So it's been a real opportunity to try something different. And I've become a big believer in the power of podcasts, especially for B2B companies looking to engage customers and prospects.
And where do people go to find that?
You can go to marketingspark.co/podcast. And that's the landing page where you can listen to previous episodes, and you can subscribe via the major podcast apps.
Yeah, and I'll put that in the chat room. When I googled it, the Apple one came up first, so I'll find the actual thing and put that in the chat room. So I just wanted to make sure because you don't normally talk about those things, and I like people to be able to follow you and whatnot ahead of time before we get into it. I've been running Toronto Starts, formerly Startup Toronto, for over 5 years now. In the first year, you were out doing speaking engagements for us, and we've been back and forth in the community. And now you're doing fractional CMO services for B2B companies. Mark specializes in brand positioning, strategic planning, and tactical execution. Can you explain that a little bit more for people who are listening?
So I recently rebranded myself as a fractional CMO, and one of the reasons was that I was doing all the things that a fractional CMO does, but I wasn't. I think it was a little bit confusing, which is ironic when a marketer has trouble marketing themselves. But what a fractional CMO does is they work on a part-time, strategic, or advisor basis, and it really is marketing on demand. A lot of organizations are not ready to have a full-time marketing professional. And so what I'm doing is offering them access to someone who has experience and expertise, but you don't have to pay full freight. You can buy what you need. You can buy a day a week, 2 days a week. You can buy a couple hours a week. It really depends on what your needs are. And it gives companies flexibility and the ability to get what they need when they need it. So I'm excited about the concept. I've had some great traction since I rebranded myself because I think that when you look at marketing priorities, strategic direction and leadership are things that people really need right now.
Great. So why don't you get the presentation shared? And while you're doing that, I'll mention to people in the chat room, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Mark's got a bunch of things to cover. But as he's covering them, if you have questions, throw them in the chat room, throw them in the Q&A room. If you've been here before, a lot of value comes when we start actually interacting and giving all sorts of different advice around your questions. So if you've got questions, please put them in the chat room, put them in the Q&A room. We want to answer them. We will get to them at the end. We don't like leaving any questions unanswered. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Greg, for the opportunity to talk about brand positioning. I'd like to thank everybody for attending today. I know everyone seems to be super busy, even though it's late July, and so what I wanted to do today is talk about brand positioning and why it matters. And I spend a lot of time talking about the importance of brand positioning on LinkedIn. I post on it on a regular basis. I blog on it. I do videos on it. And in many respects, it really feels like I'm fighting sort of that Don Quixote battle against the windmills because, well, brand positioning is important. Many companies are tactically obsessed right now. And probably some people in the audience are really focused on getting stuff done. They feel that there's a need to be busy to drive leads, awareness, engagement. And that's a misguided approach. And it's something that I want to talk about today. It's not that tactics are the wrong approach and that you shouldn't do them, because certainly you should. But brand positioning is crucial to how companies do marketing and sales. And if you're not aware of your brand positioning, if you're not focused on brand positioning, then you're really cutting yourself at the knees. So I want to talk a little bit about whoops, sorry about that. Just in terms of what brand positioning is and how you can find your positioning. And I'm going to talk about things at a very high level. I do brand positioning for companies. It's a very interesting and creative process, and there are multiple steps. What I want to do today is really provide you with a sense of what it is, how it works, and some of the key elements. So what is brand
Hey,
positioning?
Mark.
Yeah,
Could you speak a little close to the mic? Where people are asking to turn up your volume a
yeah,
little bit.
sure. Is that better? Let me tell you, is that better, Craig?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sounds better to me. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, perfect. Okay, so positioning is a few things if you want to do it by definition. One is it helps consumers understand what you do and why it matters to them. Now, this is really important because when you look at how a lot of companies operate, people are confused when they try to learn about why you matter to them. According to Microsoft, the average person spends less attention span is less than 7 seconds. And there's research that shows that when someone visits a website, they determine in less than 3 seconds whether your website is relevant or not. So if you haven't determined your brand positioning and you haven't figured out what you do and why it matters, you're going to lose people really quickly. And that's going to kill you because there's too much competition, there's too much noise. And so brand positioning is a way that you break through the noise. The other thing about brand positioning from a strategic point of view is it helps you make key decisions that affect your customers' perception of your brand. And that's really important. And what I'll talk about later in the presentation is how brand positioning really underpins what you do from a marketing, sales, customer success, and customer service perspective. So brand positioning matters because, and I love this quote because it really summarizes in a very succinct way the reality of how you're doing business. Now, companies need positioning because consumers have choices, and if you don't stand out, you lose. Now, one of the things to remember about running any business is there are companies that look like you, they sound like you, they sell the exact same products for the same prices. So when you look at it from the consumer's perspective, how do you stand out? Like, how do you stand out from the crowd? How do you differentiate yourself so that you don't look like everyone else? Because if you look the same and you sell the same and you market the same, then how do you differentiate yourself? The other reality is that consumers are distracted and it's increasingly difficult to get them to pay attention. Now, what's interesting about consumers these days is that they have different priorities than what they had 4 months ago. 4 months ago, for example, brand positioning could be about their interest in making more money. Today, brand positioning that resonates with them is about how you can save their money. So it's important to remember that brand positioning is very fluid and dynamic. It is an exercise that you will do and then you'll do it again in 3 months' time and 6 months' time. That you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, but what you need to do is make sure that your positioning is relevant, it's refreshed, and it reflects what your consumers are thinking and what their priorities are right now. Because consumers, as I said, are very distracted. They've got different priorities, and that you need to roll with the punches. You need to be saying things that are aligned with what they need and what they're interested in. As I mentioned earlier, positioning underpins your marketing and sales activities. So you have many companies these days that are really busy in terms of marketing and sales. They're doing webinars and ebooks, and they're pounding away on social media, and they're writing blog posts and leveraging LinkedIn. But the problem is that if you don't have your positioning down, if you haven't developed the right brand narrative, if you don't have a coherent and consistent way of delivering your message and your story within your sales and marketing channels, then you're going to drive confusion. You will have employees that will have different versions of the truth. So one person will talk about how your company operates in one way, and another person will talk about it in another way, and that just causes confusion. And if you're confused and your customer's confused, then you've got a problem. So what you want to do with positioning is identify that story, identify the key messages that you need to communicate, and then have them embedded into your marketing and sales so that you're being consistent, coherent, and that the same story is being told in different places at different times. Now, you can have variations on that story, but as long as you're going back to that core story, that core positioning, then your marketing and sales are going to be much more effective because people will clearly understand what you do and, as important, why you matter to them. Now, as far as positioning deliverables, and this is something that can vary from company to company, but as I said earlier, among the most high profile deliverables are more impactful marketing and sales. So you have marketing and sales that resonate with your target audiences because your positioning reflects their needs, problems, pains, aspirations, and goals. Because really, when you think about it, it's really about the customer. It's not about you. And as we'll talk about, one of the things you have to think about is your product is irrelevant. Customers don't care about your product or your technology. What they care about is how you deliver for them, how you deliver experiences that are going to make their personal or professional lives better. What are you going to do that helps resolve their pains and solves their problems and creates positive experiences for them and their businesses, whether it's getting healthier or richer or more productive? Whatever it is, your positioning needs to reflect what their needs are. The other thing that positioning does, it delivers more and better leads and higher quality prospects. So there's a lot of talk these days about the value of leads, particularly around marketing qualified leads. One of the big issues these days is the value of a marketing qualified lead and whether it is really a lead or simply an expression of interest. For example, if someone downloads an ebook, is that a marketing qualified lead or is that just somebody who's curious about the content that you created? So increasingly marketing qualified leads, I think, are losing their luster, and that we're looking for ways to drive and attract better prospects, higher quality prospects. And one of the ways that you do that is that you have brand positioning that is laser focused on the needs of your target audiences so that you're connecting with the right people in the right ways. And so as you're getting more inbound leads and getting more interest and more conversations, there's alignment between what you're saying publicly and what your customers want. So you're not getting people who are merely interested, you're increasingly getting people who want what you're selling, who want to embrace the value that you deliver. And that's another way that positioning matters. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the ability to stand out from the competition. Because being different is really, really hard. When you think about in many, many categories, there are dozens, if not hundreds of companies that sell the same type of products. So how do you stand apart? How do you position yourself in a way that is not the same as every other company out there? And that's really, really hard. So what positioning allows you to do, and what we'll talk about later, is look inward and look outward so that you can identify the things that help you basically be different from everybody else. And that's why positioning matters, because if you can't be different, then you're going to get lost in the crowd. So let's look at some real examples of brand positioning and give you a sense of how it works and what it's supposed to do. Because if you remember previous slides, what a brand positioning does is really creates a perception in the minds of customers about who you are and why you matter to them. So if you look at Geico, for example, they've been using this tagline or positioning for years. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more in car insurance. Now, in the mind of the consumer, there's no doubt about where Geico stands and the value that they provide and how they're going to meet customers' interests. You are going to spend a little bit of time and you're going to save a significant amount of money. And that's abundantly clear. And this is an example of great positioning because it resonates, it aligns with what customers want, and it's crystal clear. Now, in comparison, you look at Allstate, you're in good hands. It's good, it's different positioning, right? But it's just, it just focuses on different things. There's a sense around trust and that you've got a partnership here, but it's different from Geico, and that in the minds of consumers, they're two different types of companies. Another example is Chipotle. You know, we're not afraid to say we're real chickens. Now, Chipotle has a brand reputation for being somewhat irreverent. They're a little bit cheeky. They're very creative if you've seen some of their videos. And so they've embraced this brand positioning. They've decided to focus on things that matter to them. In this case, it's the nutritional value or the quality of your food. Now compare this to a Taco Bell, which is really about price, which is really about getting bang for the buck and being a low-cost fast food option for a particular set of consumers. Then you've got Dollar Shave Club. Again, they set the tone for their brand and how they position themselves with that infamous video that they created for, I think it was less than $10,000, and quickly helped them raise $1 million in capital, right? Again, it's cheeky, it's creative, it's irreverent. It really sets the tone in terms of how they want to be positioned in the marketplace. And you compare that with Gillette, which is the best a man can get, whatever that means, right? It's very formal. It strikes me as serious and sort of, we're a serious brand, we're a big brand, and this is how we want to be positioned. Now, the thing about all these brand positioning statements is that they're different, right? I mean, is Chipotle better than Taco Bell? Maybe, but depends on what your needs and interests are. Is Geico better than Allstate? Well, essentially they sell the same products. And is Dollar Shave Club, do they make better razors than Gillette? I would suspect that it would be pretty hard to tell. But what's more important here is that they're different. And this is a phrase that I really like because different is better than better. So it's not a matter, when you're talking about positioning, of being better than the competition. It's a matter of being different than the competition, because in the scheme of things, better is somewhat subjective. Is McDonald's better than Burger King? Well, to some consumers, yes. To other consumers, no. But what you would want to do as McDonald's is not focus on how you're better, because that's subjective, but focus on how you're different. So when you're looking at brand positioning, it's really important to focus on the ways that you're different. And it can be even something really, really small, something that's relatively minor, but if it makes you stand out from the crowd, then that's important, and that's something you can run with. I did a brand positioning exercise for a company a few months ago, and at the end of the day, what they landed upon, what made them different, was they had beautiful UI. Is that their product was a lot more intuitive, it was a lot easier to use, and that's what they rallied around. Now, other products had more features, they were more robust, they were more enterprise. Arguably, they were better products because they offered more. But so the way that this smaller startup differentiated itself was rallying around some way that it was different from the competition, not better. So that's a really good example of ways that you can stand out from the crowd. Find something that makes you different, and then run with it. So how do you discover your positioning? Now, the first thing is you look inward. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, how is your product different or unique? Now, it could be price, UI, features, your customer service, your customer success, anything that makes you stand apart. Now, one of the things you need to think about when you're looking inward is that you have to be really disciplined in avoiding biases, inherent biases, because as entrepreneurs, we love our companies, we love our products, but the reality is that we're completely biased. We see the world with one particular lens, and so sometimes we get sort of a a torque view of the world and what reality is. So what I would recommend, if you can afford it, is to hire a third party to provide perspective. They're the ones who will look at your product in a completely different way because they've really never experienced your product a lot before, and provide you with different insight and a different view of how your product works and who it serves. The second thing about your positioning exercise is what do customers like about your product? You know, talk to your customer success people or your salespeople, and to get real insight into what they like. What maybe you'll discover what makes you stand out from the crowd. As important, what don't they like? What are things that you think are important but don't matter to them? In fact, not only do they not matter to them, but they don't like it. So maybe you should look at doing something differently when it comes to your products. What are your most widely used features? You know, we all think as entrepreneurs that everyone uses every single part of our products, but in reality, if you're selling a software product, there may be things that people love about your product in particular, and you can create positioning that is focused on those particular features. And then finally, what do they talk about on social media, forums, and with customer service? What are the things that they're highlighting that they think are different about your product? And so these are all different ways that you can get some really good insight into how you're different, because the reality is you may not be able to easily identify those differences, but your customers may know them straight ahead because they've looked at different products, they probably tried different products, and they landed upon you for some reason, and your job is to find out why they did that and what makes you stand apart. And of course, ask your customers. And one thing that we may want to do in the chat, Craig, is to ask people who are participating how often they talk to their customers. Do you talk to them on a regular basis? Do you talk to them from time to time? Do you talk to them occasionally or almost never? So if you have thoughts, if you want to share thoughts, don't be shy about how often you talk to your customers. Share that, because I'm a big believer in the fact that you should talk to your customers on a regular basis. I mean, when I do brand positioning exercises, one of the things I ask of clients is to talk to their customers. I say, well, let me talk to 3 or 4 different customers, different types of customers. And what's always surprising is the things that customers will tell you if you ask them. And when I go back to a client and I say, well, this customer said this, this, and this about your product, it amazes me that they're surprised that they don't already know that. And that's the value of talking to your customers, because I would argue many companies take their customers for granted. Once they've made a purchase, you spend a lot of time engaging them, nurturing them, winning them over. Once you sign them up or they buy your product, then you forget about them. And that's the wrong approach, because they're the ones who will give you feedback, who will tell you how your product's doing and how it can be improved. And you'll get tremendous insight into not only your positioning, but how you can improve your product. And as we go, Craig, maybe you can reveal some people's thoughts on how often they talk to their customers.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, I put it in the chat room, and I'll let you know as it comes in. But I talk to my customers even more now from COVID. Like every day, I'm talking to customers in Slack. I'm doing webinars, taking Q&A. I'm doing calls, but funnily enough, when I work with startups, a lot of the times when I mention stuff that just seems so obvious to me, it's the first time it sounds like they've heard it. And it seems like they haven't been talking to customers or the right people around the idea. So it just depends, I think, on the entrepreneur up to the stage. But a lot of people are afraid to talk to the customers. So is there any way you approach you can have where they can break that fear of getting over talking to their customers?
Well, I think being afraid of your customers is a recipe for disaster, because the customers picked you for a reason, and they want to talk to you. They want to engage with you. So it could be, for example, that if you're an enterprise company, is that you call and you're selling a marketing product, for example, you call the head of marketing at the client and you ask them, hey, it's awesome that you decided to purchase our product. Why did you do that? Or you could do surveys, or you could do maybe you could do virtual coffees. There's lots of ways that you can engage your customers. And the most important thing to remember is your customers want to talk to you. You may think, well, they're busy, they don't want to give me the time of day, I don't want to bother them. But what they're looking for is they're looking to know that you care about them, that you're vested in their success, and that you want to know what they think, and you want to know how you can serve them better. And I would argue that the vast majority of customers will be happy to talk to you. The way that I would frame it is you make a minimal ask. When you reach out to a customer, say, can I get 15 or 20 minutes of your time? The perception is this is going to be easy. I'll get on the phone. It'll be over in a heartbeat. But what they'll often do is give you way more time than you want, because once you engage them and once they start talking, it's hard for them to stop. So bottom line, reach out to your customers. Hey, if some of them don't want to talk to you, fine. But if you can get half your customers to talk to you, then you're way ahead of the game, way ahead of the game. The other thing to think about with your customers is what I call crossing the chasm, is that there are two schools right now when you think about it. One is what do you think about your product and how it delivers for your customers. Again, going back to the fact that you are biased. You have a view of the world in terms of how your product performs and what it does. On the other side of the chasm, there are what do your customers think about what you do and how it meets their needs. And often there is misalignment. What you think and what they think are not the same thing. And so if that's the case, then you're in trouble. So your job as a company from a sales and marketing perspective is to narrow the gap, is to make sure that you know what your customers are thinking, how they feel, what kind of other options they may have considered or they are considering. Your job is to connect with them so that they feel that you're vested in their success, that you want them to be successful and you want to improve your product so that you can meet all their needs going forward. The other thing, as we talked about, is exploring the competitors. And you cannot do positioning in a silo. You need to think about how the competition positions itself so that you don't position yourself in the same way. You have to be different, so your positioning has to stand out even in the smallest way. So let me give you a few examples in terms of how difficult it can be or how easy it can be to position yourself differently from the competition. So I just took accounting, online accounting as a category, and you've got 4 companies here. You've got Xero, QuickBooks, Wave, and Sage. Now, if you look at them, and Craig, here's another way that that people can get involved. Of these 4 brands, which one resonates with you? Which one do you think has the most distinct brand positioning? So if you look at them, you've got QuickBooks, which is all-in-one small business accounting software. That's their positioning. The idea that their product is robust and full-featured. Anything you want to do, they can probably help you do it. With Xero, accounting software for small business, and that works anywhere you do. So they position themselves as for small business, and that it's a SaaS-based app that works anywhere. You've got Sage, which is simple accounting software and online booking. Pretty vanilla-like positioning, but you know what they do. And then you've got Wave. Inside work, there's a passion. Inside you, there's a brave entrepreneur. Now, which one do you think stands out from the crowd? Which one would capture your attention and make you think, I got to learn more about this company?
Well, according to the chat room, they like the QuickBooks one and they responded right away. Now, that last one you mentioned is more of a I'd like to find out more information, but that's only if you weren't looking for an accounting solution, because I look at that and that doesn't look like it's going to solve my problem.
Right. So that's the different takes that you can take, or different approaches that you can take positioning. So with QuickBooks, you know exactly that they're going to meet your needs, whatever your needs are. With Wave, they're trying to be creative and they're really trying hard to stand out from the crowd. But from your positioning, at least from what you see on their website, you have no idea what they do. All you know is that if you're an entrepreneur, maybe they can help you. So that's part of the balancing act when you're doing positioning. You do want to be creative, you do want to be different, but at the same time, you need to be crystal clear about what you do, who you serve, and why it matters. And if you can do that in a very creative way, then you're doing a really good job of brand positioning.
Yeah, and I look at that Wave one and I say depends on how they're driving traffic to that page. You know, if it's the same traffic everyone else is driving to their accounting page, yeah, you're having more questions than answers.
Right. So their advertising could be all about online accounting. You know exactly what they do. When you get there, you can say, well, this brand is for me. I'm an entrepreneur. I want to do it with this company.
Yeah.
So here's a worksheet, a brand positioning worksheet, and it's really simple and it's really basic. And if anybody wants access to the presentation, you can email me at mark@marketingspark.co. My contact information will be at the end of the presentation. And I'll share this worksheet with you. Now, what I like about this worksheet is it's super simple. It addresses some of the most obvious and basic questions that you need to ask about your product and your customers and the competitors. And it really gives you, in a very quick and easy way, the pillars for brand positioning. It allows you to identify what you do, who you serve, how you're different or unique, and why your product matters to customers. And if you can answer all those questions, then you've got the key pieces for a positioning exercise. Now, once you've gone through this exercise and you've got insight from your people internally and through a competitive audit, then you can fill out this sheet. You can pretty much get all the information you need to get a pretty good picture about how you want to be positioned, or the information you need to be positioned. And then you can use a template like this to build your brand positioning. Now, one thing is to remember, this is just one template. There are many different ways to create brand positioning. You can do it as formally as this and follow this formula. Some people love this formula, some people don't. Or you can use a lot of different other methods, and there's different variations on a theme when it comes to this. And just to give you an example of how this might work, I filled out this brand positioning statement for B2B companies that need to reduce churn. So you basically tell them who your target audience is and what they want to do. We sell software that lets customers' success teams provide timely and relevant insight and client content to clients. So you tell them exactly what the value is that you're delivering, like what it is that matters to them. And then you get into the brand positioning statement, which is how you're different. Unlike rivals such as X and Y that sell based on robust features, our software is beautifully designed and intuitive to use. So again, what you're doing is you're saying our competitors are positioned in this way, but we're different than they are. We're beautifully designed and intuitive to use. You're not claiming that you have robust features, because maybe you don't, but you're saying to consumers that you should think about us this way. If you want a product that's easy to use, that's user-friendly, then we're the option for you, because we can solve your problem, which is reducing churn. And this is the value, this is what we let you do to make that happen. So a very simple approach to positioning. So again, you look inward, you look outward, you use the worksheet to identify the key information pillars, and then you take that information and you use the template to make it happen. And as you'll go forward, positioning is a very iterative process, right? You'll write your positioning, you'll test it, you'll do it again and again, and eventually you'll get to something that you can rally around. And then in terms of pollinating your positioning, once you've got your position down, once you know who you are, who you serve, how you're different, and why it matters, then you put it into your presentations, into your website, your advertising campaigns, and your sales and marketing collateral, so that you have a consistent story every step along the way. Now, the one thing about brand positioning is it can be hard to quantify. And this is part of the challenge, I think, as a brand marketer, is that we are so data obsessed. We have KPIs and metrics for pretty much everything. And so a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of companies will say, well, how do I quantify the success of brand positioning? How do I know that it's working? How do I assess whether I'm getting ROI? And the truth is that it is hard to quantify. But I'll give you a little bit of perspective. When you put together a marketing strategy, when you put together a marketing plan, how do you know it's going to work? How do you know that plan, how do you quantify the value of that plan and know that it's going to deliver for you? Well, you don't until you tactically execute. And then you can go back and say, that plan was a great plan. That plan gave us the right direction so that we could tactically execute. It's the same thing for brand positioning. In many respects, you just have to do it. You have to believe that it's going to work for you. And in many respects, what happens is that a lot of companies land upon a brand positioning refresh because their story is not resonating anymore, or they've identified competitors that tell a much more compelling story, that people have an easier time understanding what they do and how they're different. And as a result, their marketing and sales, it's much more successful. And sometimes it's a gut feel. Sometimes you look and say, we need a new positioning because what we're doing is not working. Our marketing and sales aren't as effective. And that's when you buy into the idea that this is going to work for me, or at least I need this to work for me, and they'll take the leap. And in most cases, and I would say in the vast majority of people that I've worked with, once they go through a brand positioning exercise, any skepticism that they had before will disappear because they'll see things in a new light. The last client I had, they had 3 partners. 2 of them were on the fence. They weren't really sure. One of them was advocating for brand positioning. And when we did the wrap-up call, everybody was on the same page. They were amazed how well it worked. It wasn't that I created anything magical, is that I just went through the steps that you take, and I followed the worksheet and followed the template, and I created a position that reflected their customers and what they were interested in. And that's the magic of positioning. But there are ways to determine if your brand positioning makes an impact. And you can do this in different ways. And you can do, when you're talking to customers and prospects, test your new positioning, test your new, does it resonate? Does it make people ask questions? Are they confused when they do positioning? And if you're getting a positive reaction when you're talking to customers and prospects, then you know that you're on the right track. If it's not working, then you got to reload. Advertising campaigns, whether you're using LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, when you're creating ad copy, use your new positioning. And if it starts to get traction, if you can benchmark it and say, before our new positioning, our advertising converted in this way, but afterwards it converted in that way, then you'll have a better sense of whether your position worked. Again, when you're doing presentations and demos, use your new positioning. I mean, the only way to figure out whether it's going to work is that you use your new positioning with a certain set of customers or prospects, and then you use your old positioning with others and see what the reaction is. It's classic A/B testing. Test and compare, see what works. And then what you want to do is you can do some A/B testing on your website. Try your new positioning on your homepage and see what happens in terms of clicks and conversions when you use your old positioning. And use these all these techniques, because in some respects, you're just trying to get indication or evidence that your new positioning resonates. But at the end of the day, it's a bit of a leap of faith. You got to believe that the new positioning is better, it's more effective, it's clearer, it's going to resonate more. You can also talk to your customers, the people that you've talked to before, and say, listen, we've just developed new brand positioning, would love to get your reaction on it. And a lot of customers will be happy to give you reaction on that kind of thing. So again, right, there's different ways to quantify your positioning, and the more you do, the better you'll be able to refine it. So that is my overview of brand positioning. Like the last one I did on buyer personas, we covered a lot of ground in a relatively short period of time. I've tried to give you a sense of why it matters, the impact that it makes, examples of different kinds of positioning, and how you can start to take the steps to develop your own brand positioning. So if you want to connect with me and get the presentation, as I said, it's mark@marketingspark.co. I write a lot about positioning and marketing and strategy and content on LinkedIn these days. And you can visit my website at marketingspark.co. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you've got. And once again, thank you for attending the presentation today.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. And I put the email mark@marketingspark.co in the chat room so people can just take a look there. We do have one question here from the chat room, and I have a bunch of questions, and hopefully people will ask more as we go along. I'm aiming to create a brand, and I'm going to say radio, I guess, RAIDO, for special finger rings, facilitating customers with more precise smart devices, screen touching like styluses, and they have a motto for it: take your journey with precision. Is it sound marketingly right? I don't know if I like that word marketingly right, but for such a gimmick, what's your point of view on that?
Well, first impression is that you don't understand your product and what you're trying to sell. Your journey with precision could apply to a lot of things. It could be a trip. So I think what you need to do is you need to figure out, it's like, this is just sort of off the top of my head advice, is what's the benefit for users? Like when you look at your product, like how does it make using a smart device better or different? And why should they care? Like what is it about their product? Does it make it faster for them to communicate via smartphones? Does it allow them to take better pictures? Whatever it is, that's what matters to them. Being obtuse in terms of positioning really doesn't do you any good. It's not going to drive your website, your marketing, or your sales.
Yeah, this reminds me of that one you had when we were talking about QuickBooks. I think it was Wave. We didn't know what they were, but like depending on your marketing journey and how you got there, they were trying to stand out. So I'm thinking again, depending on your journey, that tagline means nothing to me, but everyone felt that the QuickBooks was clear and precise. So yeah, you really want to get to the point that people are you're solving a problem for people. And I really like how you were talking about brand positioning, and people don't. I like to do a different analogy. I work at the CNE almost every year, not this year. When I say work, we have a booth. There's a big pitch competition I help run, the CNE Emerging Innovators Pitch Competition. A bunch of startups in our community and from around the country come and they have booths, and I'm helping them try, and I'm using this analogy because it's the same. How do you stand out? There's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people walking past you, and there's thousands of booths and thousands of things on either side. How do you get them to stop and talk to you? Because they got a kid that has to go to the bathroom, and they got this and that, and it's the exact same thing online. When you open an inbox and Twitter, there's 1,000 things standing out at you. So how do you make your brand stand out and make your message clear? I think something like this, taking your journey with precision, just by itself doesn't make it clear and won't make me stop at your booth, for lack of a better word. I don't know. Does that analogy make sense to you, Mark?
Yeah, it does. I mean, the reality is that you've got to find some way to stand out from the crowd, because when there's a world full of choices, and Marty Newmeyer said in one of the slides, is that if you don't stand out, you're going to be lost within the competitive landscape. And the last thing you want to do is have positioning that doesn't resonate.
Yeah, and that might work later down. Taking your journey with precision once people understand your journey and what you're actually selling. But yeah, at a high level, I think it needs a little work. So thank you very much for that question. Scott asked the question here: how do you change your positioning on your homepage so that Google doesn't penalize you for the changes? I'm not exactly sure what he's asking specifically there. Did you want to start with this and then I'll take a run at it?
Well, I'm not an SEO expert by any means, but I would say that I would not worry about making changes to your website, because the most important thing is whether your positioning resonates with prospects and customers, whether they understand really, really quickly about what you do and why it matters for them. You need to serve them, not Google. I mean, yes, Google's important in terms of search, but it's who's really important to you. I mean, at the end of the day, your positioning is far more important than what Google thinks.
Yeah, and how much of your brand positioning is has to do with SEO keywords. So I can take a run at this a lot of times. One, you want to make sure when your SEO and brand position can be completely different from because your keywords, what drives the traffic to your site, and what your brand positioning when they get there can be completely different things. So you can definitely change this. You can definitely do A/B testing and not get penalized. If you're concerned about that, try using even Google Optimize as a tool, so you can utilize Google for those types of things. A different graphic, different headline, right in there for your WordPress site, and that works pretty well. But usually you can change your brand positioning without being penalized by Google by doing a bunch of things, right? If your brand positioning is at the top part of your page and you want to change that, but those are your keywords for Google or that's driving traffic, just move them down. We were talking about make your journey with precision. Once you've lured someone in saying, "Hey, we have a pointer for all your smart devices, and it's attractive, it's jewelry, it's already on your finger, and now you can make your journey with precision wherever you are." Now that makes sense because you're farther down. So once you've got it and attracted them, put the same content a little farther down, or something similar to keep you from being penalized from Google. And Google always likes it when you update stuff. When you update your website, you're not getting penalized. They like it. There's fresh content there. So another SEO tip is to jump in there and update your meta tags and alt tags every once in a while, and Google will reindex you and give you a little bump there. We have another question here. Does media and podcast outreach help in brand positioning? And when I say podcast outreach, from their point of view, I assume going on podcasts.
I would say that you should probably look at it in reverse. It's whether brand positioning helps you do media outreach and podcast outreach, because the only way that you're going to capture the attention of reporters or podcasters is have a story that is differentiated. If your story is the same as everybody else, then you're not going to capture the spotlight. So that's why I said earlier in the presentation that brand positioning underpins your marketing and sales activities. If you have that as a core part of your corporate DNA, then everything you do going forward from a sales and marketing perspective is going to be that much more effective. So I think it's the wrong way to look at it. I mean, positioning comes first, and then you can do a more effective messaging.
Um, I think the answer from my perspective is yes. Does media and podcast outreach help with brand positioning? Meaning that if you have a well established brand position and strategy, then media outreach and podcast outreach only bolsters that brand position because, exactly like Mark said, it starts with brand positioning. But now you're reaching out to the right podcasts, to the right media, to the right with the right story that reinforces your brand positioning. If you do it the other way around, you're just reaching out to random podcasts, random media outlets, and hoping to get some attention that may or may not reinforce your brand. So I think if you have the strategy, doing that stuff does reinforce your brand. Does that make sense? Is that
Yep.
exactly what you said, Mark?
Well, I think we said two different things, but I think that I said that brand positioning matters to do outreach, and you're saying that once you have your brand positioning, then your outreach will be that much more effective, and it's a great way of really getting brand awareness. Yeah, so I think we're on the same page. We just came at it from different angles.
The next question here is, again, not necessarily around brand positioning, but how do startups get visibility?
Do we have another hour to talk about that? Okay, so I mean, it is really a multifaceted question. So I think, to be honest with you, fundamentally, it really starts with having a product that fills a need, that solves a problem, and that people can rally around. And once you have that, then you've got to then you need to layer on brand positioning and messaging to amplify the product, because many companies believe that if I build a better mousetrap, that's enough, and it doesn't work that way. What you need to do is tell a story on top of your product. So once you have that, then you have to figure out what are the best channels to get to the people who matter to me. Where do people hang out to learn about products that matter to them? And so visibility could be using Facebook or LinkedIn or ebooks or your website, or other forms of content. But visibility can happen in hundreds of different ways.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at later on. They mentioned that their online privacy platform. So talking about making getting out there and talking about the work they do on an online privacy platform. I'm not quite sure what that means. Whether that's like a actual platform where you put stuff there and it makes private, or whether it's a platform for people to discuss around privacy legislation and privacy rules and that kind of stuff. They'll probably put something in the chat room now that I mentioned that. So thinking of online privacy platform, how do you get visibility and attention? So you go to the people who are having the problem you're trying to solve. Go to the universities, go to, I don't know, I'm just going to throw random stuff out there this night, may not be specific for you. Go to the cryptocurrency groups just because they do privacy stuff. Go to wherever people privacy is a concern, whether it's financial institutions, whether it's online business, whatever problem you're tackling, and start talking to them. Mark was mentioning talking to your customers. So as soon as you start talking to your customers, you're going to get a completely different perspective. So when you know the problem you're solving and for who, yes, attack those podcasts, get on those, get the interviews so that you can really demonstrate, one, your brand position and your power and the problem you're trying to solve. So what do we got here? Thank you. We are an app that limits their digital footprint and help protect their online privacy from data hoarders. Okay. I think that's great. Once you have your messaging down and your brand down, as Mark was saying, that's the basis. The outreach just supports your brand positioning because people are coming to your site. You're getting the same messaging out there. So yes, definitely when you're talking about getting visibility for your startup, we have got lots of past webinars on Toronto Starts. Go check it out. Getting PR in a pandemic and getting attention and all that kind of stuff. But go out there and find where they're hanging out. So you're an online privacy platform for people who are posting this. So try millennial podcasts, social podcasts, all that kind of stuff, and explain the problem to people, and then let them know how they can help and how you're solving that. That's going to get the word out. But I'm unclear about your brand positioning here, just from a few things. Any advice on how they would position this, Mark?
Well, for one, I didn't understand what an online privacy platform was. So that's the problem, right? So really positioning around that doesn't make a lot of sense. At least it's not the way that you should lead. What resonated to me was helping people limit their digital footprint, because a lot of people are worried about digital identity theft and making sure that they can control what's visible to other people out there. So what you're doing there is you have to focus on your target audiences. What matters to them? What are they interested in? Why would they be interested in your product at all? And if you position yourself as, we help you, we protect your digital footprint, or we help you limit your digital footprint, a lot of people are going to go, yes, I want that. How do you do that? And then you say, well, we have this online privacy platform that does this, this, and this, right? And that makes your positioning much more user-friendly, because it's about them, not about you.
Yeah, and now that we have a clear idea, strike while the iron's hot, as the old saying goes. I don't know if that's a blacksmith saying or where that comes from. I want to look that one up, but meaning that, when there's a Facebook controversy and a Twitter controversy and any of these social media controversies where they're talking about your data and what's limited and they're all over the news, that's when you hit the press. That's when you start saying, hey, we'd love to talk to you about this, but come at it from an angle of, when you're talking to the press and trying to get attention, you have to do a lot of their work for them. What's the story? What's the headline? What's the hook? And you have to feed that to them, so they're going to give you the time of day. That'll give you a lot of publicity, but keep that in mind with your brand positioning. If it's out of sync, people will go to your website or hear you, and it'll be incongruous and it won't work for you. Does that make sense, Mark?
Makes sense to me? Absolutely.
Yeah, and those types of things. So I was looking at I like the scenario because I've been there. It's astonishing when you go to the CNE and you're talking to startups, and they all think everyone's going to stop at my booth because it's going to be the coolest thing ever. But people don't care. People do not care. So how do you make them care? Like, what's the sign? What's the thing? What's the flashy giveaway? What's to make them stop for that 30 seconds to give your message? And it's the same thing at the top of your page. It's the same thing with your social media. You've got to really ring true. Your brand positioning, your messaging really has to ring true to make them say, hey, because it's a lot of noise out there. So, and people are trying to figure out whether, one, you align with me, and are you going to solve my problem? So do you have any advice on standing out in that kind of noise, in that kind of crowd?
Well, I think the answer is pretty simple. It's just being completely customer centric. As I said, your product is important, but it's really not important to your customers because it's a delivery vehicle. What matters to them is their problems and their pains and the experiences that they want to have. And so your brand positioning, marketing, and sales really needs to directly talk to them, those kind of things. So that if people go, hey, they can solve my problem, or they can help me enjoy these experiences, that matters to me. I'll give you a simple example. Airbnb. It does not position itself as an online booking service for accommodations around the world. It positioned itself it did position itself as a way that you can experience different places and different people, and that you can belong anywhere. So what they're doing is, if you want to have this experience, if you want to enjoy this kind of travel experience, you should buy from us. And then people can go, well, that sounds really good to me. How does it work? And then they can get into that kind of positioning. So it really is about being aspirational or solving people's problems. And that's how you connect with them.
So, just another couple quick questions here. Going through these templates, and don't forget to email Mark. Mark's email address is mark@marketingspark.co for these templates and the presentation. Standing out from the crowd also means understanding what the competition is. So I can do those templates, but how do I compare or do my research on what my competition's messaging is?
So one of the basic steps is identify your biggest competitors. So it could be direct competitors or indirect. So for example, could be Excel versus accounting software. Like you really have to identify if your customers didn't buy from you, who would they buy from? And it could be 5 competitors or 10. Like you don't want to look at that many because there's only so many ways that you can do positioning. But get a sense of who's important, who could matter to your customers, and then look at their websites. What are the words that they use? What are the phrases? What are the biggest benefits that they highlight? Do they talk about UI? Do they talk about features? Do they talk about price? Do they talk about customer service? Like every competitor will rally around something that matters to them. So if your QuickBooks, for example, it's one-stop shopping. If you're Sage, it's simplicity. So once you identify those themes, they don't have to be terribly complicated. Then you can figure out, okay, that I can't be like QuickBooks. I can't position myself as one-stop shopping because they already own that. And I don't want to position myself as simple because Sage does that. So you've got to be a little bit creative in terms of how you position yourself between those competitors. But that's the easiest way to do it. And it's not terribly complicated. It's just a matter of really taking an honest look at what they do and how they talk about themselves.
Yeah, and would you recommend doing exactly what you did with the slide there of saying, let's take a screenshot of our competitors and then a couple of examples of ours and maybe a couple of potential futures and then run that by some customers and see which ones they ring true with to hone your message?
You could do that. I mean, the other place where you can find this kind of insight is on about pages, because a lot of companies will describe themselves and their products and how they're different on those pages. But I think the exercise is very valuable internally. I think being able to look at different options gives you perspective, and that's everything when you're doing brand positioning. And once you've got that insight, then you can develop your own positioning, and then you can test that. And your customers and prospects will say, "Hey, that's really unique," or they'll say, "It reminds me of QuickBooks," and then you're probably on the wrong path. So there is steps you can take, but I would say that even a simple look at what your customers are saying, what your competitors are saying, is very valuable.
So, any final words for our audience?
I would say that there is a sense of urgency around tactical execution these days, and that's important because everybody's scrambling to drive leads and for that matter, stay in business. But at the same time, your marketing and sales would be less effective if your brand positioning is off or it doesn't stand out from the crowd. So you do have other priorities, and they are seemingly important right now. But I would argue that brand positioning is as important, if not a critical thing to look at. And even if you take a light look, even if you just take a quick look at your positioning and see if it can be improved, then that'll drive a lot of ROI.
I couldn't agree more. And if people want to work with you or find out more or get the templates or the slides, where do they go?
You can reach out to me at marketingspark.co or email me at mark@marketingspark.co.
And thanks again for taking the time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll see you all in the future soon.